Okay, so this is my second book review that I'm putting onto YouTube. Again, on a book I've recently read that I think I have some things to say that no one else on YouTube is saying, largely because I think only one other person has actually posted any kind of review of this book. So it's Logicomix, An Epic Search for Truth. There it is. Hold up close for you. So what's this book about? The obvious answer would be Bertrand Russell, but to give you a better answer, this is a book whose overriding narrative is about the search for a logical foundation for mathematics and the madnesses that can come when you take part in that search. Especially if you refuse to accept the possibility that it may be turtles all the way down. So what the hell am I talking about? Well, let's define our terms first. What is logic? Logic is a language of pure reason where we build conclusions about the world from certain basic assumptions. If the form of our argument is valid, then accepting those assumptions means accepting the conclusion by necessity. So to give you an example, here is an argument taking the form of a syllogism, a classic logical argument. So all cats are pink. Jeffrey is a cat. Jeffrey? All cats are pink. Jeremy is a cat. Therefore Jeremy is pink. Whether or not those first two assumptions are actually the case doesn't matter, because the form of the argument is valid. If we do accept those first two assumptions, it would mean we would have to by necessity accept the conclusion. So we take two little pieces of knowledge and are able to get a third piece of knowledge from it. So you can also, if you're a logician, you would maybe take that language argument and take it down to its kind of logical form, which would be expressed as all A are X, J is A, therefore J is X. And if you want to take that a step further, you could use one of the logical languages that magicians have come up with, where basically they take the whole thing and put it into symbols, into something resembling a mathematical equation. So we've got one here. So what lacks in maths? Why would you want to give it a logical foundation? Surely maths is self-evident. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Self-evident. But in some ways, that is an assumption. Why does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Some logicians thought saying just because wasn't enough, and they wanted to have a logical proof for why we can use math as a trustworthy tool. So Bertrand Russell famously did this in his book Principia Mathematica, which was this massive, dense tome that took years and years of work, and by the final page shakily proved that yes, 2 plus 2 equals 4. So you can see that's the kind of realm we're getting into, this crazy hardcore logical kind of pursuit that people did over the 20th century. That's kind of what this little graphic novel covers. So what did I mean by turtles all the way down? Well, there's an Indian kind of world myth where the world is this is carried on the backs of 4 elephants who are in turn carried on the back of a great turtle, which raises the obvious question: what's the turtle resting on? And if you try to give the turtle something to rest on, what's that resting on, and so on. So basically, it's a symbol for an apparent foundation, which on closer inspection is in fact groundless. And positing more foundations requires positing foundations ad infinitum, so you have turtles all the way down. A similar thing would be the why game that little children sometimes play. So when you say, don't do that, and they say why, and you give them an answer, and they respond to every single answer with why, and your explanations get more and more absurd. So at some point you just have to say just because, or you can keep arguing forever, or you can get caught in some kind of loop. Either way, it's turtles all the way down in the why game. So finding a logical proof for mathematics proves in Logicomix to be a bit of a why game. So Logicomix tells the story of Bertrand Russell and other logicians navigating this problem in their quest to find some kind of ultimate truth. It is a lot more fun than it sounds. I maybe didn't sell it quite so well there. So why is this book cool? Why would you actually want to buy it? Well, I think that graphic novels are a pretty excellent way to get into philosophy. If you've ever studied philosophy in your own time or out of your own interest, I did it for a year in school. There's a lot of tried and tested kind of sayings or almost cliches that you'll come across. One of them is philosophy thrives on examples. So maybe you've seen, like, say you're a fan of Lost and you see a philosophy of Lost book. There's always different philosophy of this or philosophy of that, these pop culture things that basically just use whatever TV show, whatever it is you like, to get into these bigger ideas. Philosophers often give kind of visualizations and scenarios and thought experiments to explain their ideas. A famous one being Brain in the Jar. So rather than going into all these complicated, after going into all these complicated spiels about sense, data, perception, your mind, your body, they say, okay, imagine your brain in a jar and an evil scientist is controlling you, and suddenly their argument or their point makes sense to the average Joe. So yeah, a theory written down in hard text or logical syntax can be dry and very hard to relate to the real world. But as soon as you attach an image or situation, it comes alive and it becomes far easier for your brain to process. And that's one thing Logicomix does really well, is as well as following Bertrand Russell's life, you explore his ideas in a way that is totally approachable, which I think is really cool. So, like, along those lines, I was on the guy's Wikipedia page trying to learn myself a little bit, and I saw it mentioned that Logicomix was a thing, that there's a graphic novel about him, and I immediately pounced on it because I thought, okay, this way I can actually learn and have fun, and I will actually learn and not just walk away confused at the end of it all. So yeah, it brings philosophy alive in a really cool way. It visualizes it. It's easy to read, but secondly, it also has a narrative. In fact, it's got three, kind of like Russian dolls. So the outer narrative, we have the creators of the comic discussing it, and kind of having their own little debates about logic and Bertrand Russell and all that. So it's a bit kind of knowing, self-reflexive or whatever. And then within that, they tell of a lecture Bertrand Russell gave, where he persuaded some people who wanted America not to go into World War II to basically be less dogmatic and be more reasonable about the whole thing. And then in that story, he tells like an anecdote about his growing up and his pursuit for this ultimate truth, which makes up the main narrative. But there is three, and they all have their own kind of intricacies. So yeah, you get a lot of good stuff in all of those. So yeah, Bertrand's main story is very good. The other guy that put a review of this graphic novel touched on this. Basically, because we're seeing Bertrand Russell's life, you don't just get his life on its own and his ideas on their own. You see them in their historical and intellectual context. So philosophers did a lot of stuff together, like Bertrand Russell went to, I think it was Cambridge, where he studied under so-and-so philosopher, studied with so-and-so philosopher, and eventually went to other universities and became tutor of so-and-so philosopher. So probably the second main character after Russell himself is Ludwig Wittgenstein, probably equally famous philosopher. And you get to see not just how they relate to one another in their relationship, but also how their ideas relate to one another in the context of that relationship, which is something you won't get out of a textbook that I find really cool. So yeah, like I said, it's not just a story about Bertrand Russell. There's like a full cast of analytic philosophers, logicians, mathematicians, and so on. So I'm just going to list them all here just to give you an idea. So there's Bertrand Russell, Ludwig Wittgenstein, G. Moore, Alfred Whitehead, Gottlob Frege, Georg Cantor, Mittag Leffler, Hermann Minkowski, Felix Klein, Richard Dedekind, Henry Poincaré, I might pronounce that wrong, David Hilbert, Kurt Gödel, Moritz Schlick, John von Neumann. So yeah, that's all of them. I checked through the whole book to spot everyone, and some of them only get a couple frames, others are main characters. So I'm just going to end my wee spiel and tell you a story of how I finished this graphic novel. I was riding on a train, feeling awfully embarrassed because this was only the second graphic novel I read, and yeah, it's not the kind of thing I would have felt comfortable at that stage reading in public. But the guy who's sitting next to me glanced a couple times. I was worried he might judge me or whatever. But actually, he had a wee chat, and he said, yeah, I'd heard of this book before, is it good? And I said, yes. And he was impressed I was actually bothering to read the appendices, but even they were quite interesting. But he recommended a similar graphic novel about a physicist. I don't know very much about physics, but I reckon it would be a good way to learn. But I can't remember the physicist's name, so I'll have to look for that. But yeah, I would buy, I reckon, just about any graphic novel about some great thinker that I had any kind of interest in, because I think it's an amazing, fun way to learn about these things. So I heard there was a Spinoza one. I really like Spinoza. I don't know if it's in English yet though, but if you know anything like these, like this that you think would be interesting, just leave it as a comment or whatever. that'd be really interesting. So yeah, one more thing before I go. If you like this video or any of my others, please consider buying my ebook. It's a wee collection of short stories up on the Amazon Kindle store called 13 Miniature Adventures. It's only $1.50, or if you're in the UK it's £1. I think it would be worth your time checking it out. Please do. Anyway, thank you for watching, and check out my other videos. Bye bye.